Let's move to our next speaker. As we said, there are co-presidencies. So we also have one from the south and eastern side. In this case, it's Dr. Khaalid Wazani, chairman of the Jordanian Investment Commission. You, sir, have an extraordinary CV, if I may say so. Starting with a professor of economics, but also having been a director general of the Jordanian Customs and a CEO of companies. You've worn all the hats there are to wear, sir. I think I'm really looking forward to what you're going to say.
Well, thank you very much, and excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and good day to everybody. And let me, at the outset, convey Her Excellency's greetings, Ms. Maha Al-Ali, the Minister of Industry and Trade and Supply in Jordan, who could not make it, but luckily enough, my colleague Maha has appointed me to be with you this morning and to listen to those beautiful keynote speakers as well as the panels today. And if I may, if I have only 5 minutes to address this beautiful group, I will have 5 remarks trying to cover the areas related to it. But at the end of the day, my aim is to look at the objectives of such a forum, in which we have to say that trade and investment is really the way out to create opportunities for job creation, particularly to youth in the world, and particularly and especially in youth in our part of the world, where youth is almost 70% of population. In that sense, probably the good news of a vaccine discovered here or there that we've heard over the last couple of days make it something that we have to be optimistic that things has to move forward, whatever the case is. And in the 5 points that I would like to address you today with are, number one is, we all know that FDI and trade is in a way or another highly related to each other. And in that sense, today, although the latest UNCTAD report says that the FDI has went down by almost 49% in the overall picture of the world in the first half of 2020, still there is certain opportunities that can be created out of the FDI, and we still can look into preparing different type of businesses in which each and every country can look to its needs, but not only that, it has to work with the other regional as well as the international domain to make sure that we can create the right business and we can bring in the right FDI. At the end of the day, yes, FDI was not really growing over the last 5 years in the way that we would like to see it. But still, when we said that last year FDI was almost 1.5 trillion of dollars, this means that there are still money for investment somewhere in the world. They feel the uncertainty, but they are willing to exploit opportunities, especially with sectors that, as we all know, has flourished during the epidemic, vis-a-vis those sectors that were hit harshly by the epidemic. And the second point, given that FDI and trade are so important, then for all countries to think of what needs to be done, the crisis management has taught us 2 things to work with. Number one is business continuity, even if we have a complete lockdown in any of our countries. And number 2, business continuity is not enough. You have, and each policymaker has to look into the early warning system techniques that would help push forward the economy, as well as make sure that healthcare is in the top of the priority. We're talking about a pandemic that is at least can be identified as an enemy to the humanity everywhere in the world. But this should not prevent us from making sure of business continuity and making sure that we can plan to our future, to the generation's future, to the requirements of not only keeping business intact, but also to make sure that we can create what it takes to deal with such a situation and move forward. And that leads me to the third point, and probably the most important one. Yes, each and every crisis has challenges whatsoever we try, but at the same time, each and every crisis creates opportunities. We can't just put our heads on the sand and say, let it go. It has to be worked out in a way that we look into different opportunities that allow us to do the three things that you're going to discuss in the three panels. Look in the supply chain that needs to be revised and make sure that we can live with a supply chain that makes the economy and the trade moves and the ecosystem still move, whatever the case is. Look into the trade opportunities that create jobs, and that's in the second panel that as I noticed. But thirdly, and most importantly, let's search for the right investments that will create jobs and make sure that the trade will still work and move forward. Because at the end of the day, we all know that trade and investment, they work together, and investors look into not only local markets, but also international ones, and trade comes in the first objective of optimizing their return when it comes to doing business. And that leads me to the fourth point in my remarks that I take from my economist background. Today's economic behavior is one of the fields that every policymaker in our region and everywhere in the world has to deal with. Today, we have to create the right nudge units that creates the right future foresight that makes us know what it takes to move our economies forward, not in a single economic perspective, but in a global perspective. And that leads to the issue of the SDGs. When we look into the SDGs today, I know it starts with the poverty alleviation and hunger alleviation, but at the end of the day, in the 17th objective, it leads to the partnership. And as His Excellency Mr. Oliver alluded to, partnership is very important, where both private sector and public sector has to work together. But at the end of the day, policymakers has to take the lead. And that's where the nudge on it, and that's where the behavior economics comes. And that's where we can try not only to minimize the implication of the pandemic, but also to optimize the new approach of doing business that was created because of that pandemic worldwide. And that's where future foresight comes in the picture. And finally, my fifth point is that we can't live in isolation, as we know. The globalization has made it clear that we all has to work together. But also the pandemic has made it clear that, guys, yes, if you want to fight COVID-19, social distancing is important. But if you want to deal with COVID-19, we have to come closer to each other in terms of our policies. And that's where interdependence in the world is very important. And that's where we have to help each other worldwide with all the requirements that makes trade much more facilitated, but also that makes investment flow among all our nations as well highly facilitated without any sort of controls, whatever it takes. So at the end of the day, and my last point is, if we are really keen about job creation, if we are really keen about doing business, if we are really keen about making sure that humanity is in a better off position after COVID-19 than it used to be before COVID-19, the only thing we can do is to work together, and to make sure that interdependence means everybody wins from its own side, to make sure that welfare to our population is put in place, but also to make sure that the private sector is making their returns and achieving their objectives. Governments are serving their people in a way much better than it used to be, and job creation is a process of both companies, private sector, government creating jobs, but also youth by themselves with the new techniques, with the new digital economy, with the new artificial intelligence, are also creating their own jobs, not only trying to look for a job. They have to find their own jobs, not only to look for jobs. And that's where government, private sector, and all stakeholders has to work together to make sure that we, in a world of interdependence, are very much keen to increase investment among nations, and that's where FDI, trade among nations, and then job creation internally and internationally. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope I did convey the messages that are relevant to your meetings today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wazani. Thank you so much indeed. And I think you make a very fundamental point. We have to make all boats rise together. This is a win-win. This is not win-lose. Thank you so much, sir.